Greetings, everyone. So, this is the first inaugural attempt at making a workshop happen over Zoom. You know me, I'm Megan, I'm your instructor. This is Alan Swirsky. He is
Hey,
also a GTA, a graduate teaching assistant at GSU. He also teaches composition here. And he is someone, though, who has creative writing expertise. So he has been through the workshop process and he has a little of that under his belt. So if you want to just like mention anything about yourself.
sure. So I'm also working on my PhD, and I come from a creative writing and poetry background. Um, but that also includes a lot of looking at fiction, looking at nonfiction, and generally assessing other people's work. The process is the same no matter what we're looking at, whether we're looking at a poem or an essay. Feedback is critical.
Yeah. So, this is going to be a good experience. What we're going to do now is you've read my first draft of my essay, and so has Alan. And what he's going to do is kind of simulate what you're doing in the discussion posts. So, he's going to spend a few minutes telling me what he thought was effective, any points of confusion he had, what he thought wasn't so effective, and then he'll ask me some questions, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue back and forth. And maybe that mirrors the kind of dialogue that you can have on your discussion board. So we'll get started, and Alan is probably going to pull up my actual essay. So he'll be sharing his screen throughout to give a little bit more context for what to, where in the essay he'll be having comments. So go for it, Alan. I'll hand it over to you. I'll be quiet and I'll wait for my time to talk.
Right. So, sharing the essay, you should be able to see it now. I'll point out a couple of different things first. One, I left comments all over it. You don't necessarily need to do that, but it does help, especially if you have thoughts about specific points or larger ideas. But something I encourage all of my students to do is to leave some kind of ending note. This encapsulates a lot of the questions and the things I was thinking about while reading. So that's actually where I'm going to start. Having read Megan's essay, there are things I like about it, things that I find questionable. I like that it's a very beautiful story. It's simple, it's relatable in a certain way. You understand the characters to an extent. There's a lot of repetition of musical terms and imagery and what are otherwise very beautiful little moments between characters. I like the way that on alternating paragraphs we're going forward and backward in time. We have the present and then we go back to some previous thing that occurred and we keep that pattern throughout. And that lets you know as the reader that we're going to reach some kind of conclusion at the end that should be a culmination of these things. What I had questions about were, I don't know exactly what the point of the story is. Not every story has to have a point or a purpose, but there should be something that the reader leaves the story with. I don't know if this is just supposed to be a beautiful story, or if I'm supposed to leave this story understanding more about these characters in some way than when I began. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to understand something about myself as a reader. And as a side note, as someone who also teaches personal narratives, that's almost always what we aim for, is to have your reader find some point of relation in this essay. So I'll make that my opening point. What do we want out of this essay, out of this narrative? What does Megan want to share?
Right. So at this point, this would be a good moment if you want to turn the screen off for the moment, and we can come back to it if we want to refer to a specific point. So I love already this commentary that Alan has given me because I did not do the job that I needed to do. I need to make a point. And while you can have a very creative way of getting your thoughts on paper, Alan and all readers should walk away with a clearer idea of what it all meant to me. So I'll just kind of talk to you. My aim here was to show, so here was kind of the story that I wanted to tell. I'm someone who is dealing with a relationship that's over, but a relationship that was very meaningful to me, and a relationship not just with a person, but with a kind of music that's become very integral to my identity. And so the conflict that I was exploring was, how do I salvage something of a relationship with a partner that I no longer am romantically involved in, but is someone who represents the only kind of real connection I have in terms of a friend to this kind of music. And so I wanted to show that I started off being unsure how this was going to unfold. I was transitioning from a kind of romantic partner to a good friend with somebody. So that was one thing, I'm showing that transition. And I think I was also trying to show that we had a history of sharing that music, and that what ended up happening was that the music was enough to keep us being friends despite our no longer being romantic partners. So that was sort of what I was going for. And at this point in time, if you get feedback like what Alan gave to me, where he's saying, I didn't quite get it, that's okay. But you want to ask them, once you explain what the point is, how are some ways that I could get that point better across based off of what I've written? So, Alan, do you have any ideas for that?
Sure. So we start off early in the story finding out that this is about a divorce and an ended relationship. And it's clear throughout that this is very much about the relationship, but that invites the question of how the relationship ended. And even if that end of the relationship is not the point of the story, that's a detail that a reader might need to make sense of the end.
Okay.
We know that it ended, and yet by the time I reach the end of the story, I think, why did this end? You seem perfectly content, barring occasional hints, but little more than that.
Right. So in other words, I could either, in those moments, because I do give some hints throughout, like he always did this or he never did that, maybe I could use those hint moments as opportunities to expand a little bit and give some context for what the points of disagreement were or something like that. To demonstrate that, like, we don't work as romantic partners, but we work as good friends who share this media, essentially.
Right. And just to point out, something I wrote in my ending paragraph here. So the general questions I already asked: what am I supposed to get from this piece? What am I supposed to see?
Right.
But I ask a couple questions that I think might. Oops, come on. That I think might help this writing process.
Aha.
The narrator move on from these moments. Is there more to the story?
Aha.
Why did you choose to start the story here? And then, where's the scene where we see that you love music without Walt?
Aha.
We see where Walt is engaging with music without you.
Yeah.
But, we need more details to fill in the gaps of who these characters are.
Okay. So that's, I can totally do that. And I can work on brainstorming ways to do that. What else in terms of, how about the way that I used different elements of language or of formatting, syntax, my parts of speech, maybe even tense. I also used italics quite a bit throughout. There's a lot going on, and I was being super creative. I was just letting myself be creative, but I think also I wonder how it came across to you as a reader.
Okay, so we definitely have lots and lots of musical terms, but one I like that I'm going to point out here.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed a pretty quick repetition of terms that deal with space. I calculated it on the word contained. In my note here, I saw enveloping, encompassing, contained, and then I realized that in the previous line, the word bound.
Yeah.
Using a lot of words that talk about limits of space, whether you feel confined by something. And where I thought this could go, which you might consider,
right,
I would expect that by the end of this piece, maybe there could be a representation of freedom.
Oh, wow, yeah.
At other times, you have lines like this one that I've highlighted up here.
Oh my God, please don't read that one. This is actually, you can absolutely read it. So this is one of those where if you've watched my writing process video, there's a great meme where it's a Will Smith with the Men in Black little light that erases your memory. And it says something like, when people get a hold of my first draft, because you're so embarrassed by the insane things that you write. So I know Alan is about to drag me for this ridiculous line, but please, by all means.
I'll drag you less than you think here. perfectly fine, especially on a first draft, to experiment
Yes.
with lines like this, because you never know when something might work for you and when it might be really, really productive to your reader. But what you want to be careful of is that this line in this sentence should still make a kind of meaning, right? Yeah. I don't understand what these terms mean.
You don't? How could you not understand what an expansive fabric of breadth of all possible emotion is?
Because I cannot picture it.
Right.
Imagine what that looks like.
Right.
And it's clear that it has meaning.
Right.
That meaning isn't made for me as the reader. And that's where we want to draw that distinction. So if you did want to use a line like that, let's try and tether it to something a little more concrete.
Yeah.
Simply saying, blending into an expansive fabric, a mountain of complicated truth. What the hell does a complicated truth look like? You could say, this, to be cliche, this always felt like a moment that brought me back home and reminded me of who I was and who my friends were, and who I fell in love with, and so on and so forth.
Right. So in other words, Alan is talking about making a clear image for readers, and that is usually more compelling than these kind of abstract, philosophical, loosey-goosey, non-concrete ways of expressing yourself.
And then to conclude this little section with something a little more specific, I did comment sparingly at first on the use of italics and the use of ellipses. It's clear that the paragraphs alternate between present and past. I didn't think the ellipses were necessary.
Okay.
A different reader might think otherwise. So, there's no reason to immediately take that sort of criticism and delete them.
Right.
Ultimately, it's also clear that italics represent thought.
Yes.
So, we are thinking this line, But then we get to this. Why am I going? And am is the emphasized word here. And the only way to emphasize that was to take it out of italics.
Right,
and
so that's confusing.
Why not just put am in bold?
I like that. Yeah.
And there, we still see some consistency.
Right. Leave it in italics, but put it in bold. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you want to take yourself off share screen, and I'll just conclude with the group. Honestly, Alan and I could go on for like another hour probably, because there's always ways to improve writing. And this can be, instead of a painful experience, even though I got a little verklempt whenever he was talking about my one extremely obnoxious abstract sentence, it's still very helpful, and it's useful to hear other people's ideas, because not only can they show you where you're being a little unclear, but they can give you great ideas for how to improve. So I hope this helped a little bit. Thank you, Alan, for giving us some insight, and we'll be back shortly with what not to do. So stay tuned.